This is my 12 gallon or 45 litre golden White Cloud Mountain Minnow tank, and it's currently 105 days old. It's kept at room temperature, and since it's December, this room is averaging around 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. This tank is probably my favourite in the fish room right now, and I just love the jungle style aquascape of it, and fortunately it's pretty easy to set up, so let's get into the build. I started by adding some privacy film to the back of the tank to improve its overall appearance, but this is an optional step. Instead of using expensive aquascaping backgrounds, I just used some cheap window privacy film from Amazon. It's easy to apply. You simply spray some water on the tank glass, apply the film, smooth it out, and then trim any excess with a scalpel, a knife, or some scissors. I already started to prep Hardscape for another tank before deciding I actually wanted to use it in this one, so some of the plants are already on there. It's a piece of spiderwood with an Anubias coin leaf on the left hand side and some Anubias Petite in the front. I decided to use fluval stratum for the substrate because I've used it in several tanks and I always get good results. Initially I did try to add it by hand to try and avoid getting substrate granules on the hardscape, but in the end I just ended up pouring it in because it was taking too much time. I ended up adding the full 8 kilogram bag, and it gave me a nice 2-inch layer of substrate which should support healthy plant growth and provide plenty of surface area for beneficial bacteria and archaea colonies. Next, I added a few inches of water to wet the substrate, making it easier to add the plants, and I also added 2 additional pieces of stone to the tank. These were initially sold as Sirius stone, but I am pretty sure they're a different type of rock because they do look different. Although they have increased pH and TDS in the tank as I intended them to, there hasn't been any major problems, so thankfully they do seem aquarium safe. Next, I moved on to planting, and I added 3 Anubias Caladifolia plants, 1 on the left hand side and 2 on the right. It's important to note that these plants are mounted to the hardscape rather than planted in the substrate. I secured them to the rocks in driftwood using Moss Scapers glue, but Gorilla Glue gel is a suitable alternative. After that, I added some narrow leaf Java Ferns to the back right of the tank, keeping them on top of the driftwood because I want a thick area of foliage that can be used for hiding spots for shrimp and fry, as well as any non-dominant male minnows. After that, I added some Bucephalandra kedegang, and this is easily one of the most hardy types of Bucephalandra I've ever kept, and it usually does very well in my tanks. The in vitro cup included 4 plantlets which I used for detailing and adding small pops of red to the scape. In the end, I decided to just add them to various rocks and driftwood pieces in the tank to try and spread the red out. Then I added Anubias Nana Petite, as the regular Anubias Petite was sold out when I put the plant order in, but this one is medium difficulty, but thankfully so far it seems to be thriving. I really like the green hue of this plant, so I placed a large portion of it near the front of the tank to create some contrast. Then I planted some Helanthium Tenellum Green in the foreground of the tank, and this has been the most reliable carpeting plant for low-tech tanks I've tried. It did take a while to break it down into smaller plantlets, but it's definitely worth the effort. As this grows out and carpets the foreground of the tank, it should grow to a height where it can provide cover for the White Cloud Mountain Minnow's eggs, preventing them from being eaten by their parents. Thankfully, the 12 gallon tank isn't too big, so planting this didn't take long, and I was surprised by how good it looked from the start. Next, I added some Hygrophila Corymbosa Siamensis 53B. I am brand new to this plant, and I was curious about how it would go, especially in a room temperature tank, but it does seem to be doing well. Then I added some Limnophila Sessiliflora to help with natural water purification, specifically TDS, ammonia and nitrite, and I put it in the back left of the tank. With all the plants in the tank, it was time to fill it with water, so I placed a small square of tissue in the bottom of the tank to protect the plants, and then I topped it up with water. I was actually quite surprised by how much I liked the look of the tank at this stage of the build, and I was very happy that nothing floated to the surface. Just to quickly go over the tank accessories that I'm using in this tank. I decided to give the Hyger HG076 light a try for this setup, as it's cheaper than the Hyger 957 and it should provide all the light and intensity required for these plants. For filtration, I opted for an all-pond solution hanging back filter, but I do personally prefer to customize the filter media instead of relying on the cartridge system. I just take the included cartridge and use it as a template Substrate to cut out some 30 ppi foam to the correct size, and then do the same process with some filter floss. After the customization, this filter should provide plenty of surface area for beneficial bacteria and archaea colonies to maintain safe and stable water parameters. Personally, I am a big fan of these newer Night Crew hang-on backs, and they are smaller, but if you customize them in the same way, they should easily be enough for a 12-gallon tank, and I kinda wish I used this as it is a lot smaller and less intrusive. I'm not a big fan of this surface skimmer system, but I did decide to try it just to try and clear the surface of the water. Then I added some tap water conditioner to remove the chlorine and chloramines that could harm the beneficial bacteria and archaea colonies in the tank. Next, I started to cycle the tank and chose a fishless cycle using Dr. Tim's ammonia solution to simulate a bioload. It's very easy to use, and you literally follow the instructions on the label to work out how much you need to add relative to your tank size, and then you add the product and leave it to do its thing. After adding the ammonia solution, I also added some all-in-one liquid fertilizer, as there's no livestock in here to produce waste that the plants can use as nutrients. So just to quickly fast forward to week 1, and as you can see, the plants did develop some algae, but there really wasn't any major developments. Just to fast forward to week 2, and the algae growth is getting worse, but it's not a major issue because my algae eaters will handle this with ease. Algae and diatoms did start to accumulate on the filter floss, so I replaced it to stop the filter from clogging. I also performed a quick water top up to compensate for evaporation, and I also added some tap water conditioner to protect the beneficial bacteria and archaea in the tank. As the initial dose of ammonia solution was being consumed during the cycling process, I had to top it up to make sure that the process would continue as planned. Unfortunately, the high ammonia levels did start to affect some of the more delicate plants in the tank, which led me to switch to a fishless and plantless cycle for my future tanks, but more on that later. So jumping forward to week 3, an algae had spread throughout the tank, including the green surface algae. The Helanthium Tenellum Green had also started to melt, but based on my experience, it does this in around half of my tanks, and then over the coming month it grows back. This is also when I realised the other 2 rocks probably weren't Sirius stone, as they look completely different to how it should look in its submerged form. By this point, a lot of the Anubias plants were in a heavy melt stage, and I was worried about losing some of them. But the cycle was in full swing, and the ammonia solution was being used up quickly by the bacteria and archaea colonies, so I had to redose Dr. Tim's again. By day 26, the cycle was almost complete, so I added some pink ram's horn snails to start working on the algae. These snails are native to Florida, but they are considered a hothouse alien species here in the UK, meaning that they can't survive our winters in a pond, but they can do fine in room temperature aquariums and greenhouses, making them perfect for this tank. This clip shows snails moving down the glass and eating the algae within minutes of being added to the tank, and they do seem to be solid algae eaters for soft algae types. Jumping forward to week 4, and the algae had basically taken over the tank, but thankfully it was mainly brown diatom and soft green algae that the algae eating crew would eat with ease. My water parameter test kit indicated that the cycle was complete because the tank could take a 2 ppm dose of Dr. Tim's ammonia solution and process it to 0 ppm ammonia and nitrite within 24 hours. I also checked the phosphate levels, as I have had issues before with this causing blackbeard and staghorn algae, but thankfully everything was looking good. So with water parameters being stable, I decided to add more algae eaters to the tank to start cleaning things up. I netted 4 Ormano shrimp out of my other tanks and transferred them over to this one to help manage the algae. Ormano shrimp are widely regarded as some of the best algae eaters in the hobby, and they always tend to perform well in my tanks. Then I added some Neocaridina shrimp to the tank, and I collected some from my yellow Neocaridina breeding tank. These shrimp are often underrated as algae eaters, but they can consume large amounts of soft algae. Unfortunately, by this point, most of the Anubias plants were having issues with melt. Thankfully, the filter was now capable of handling the ammonia levels, so this shouldn't be a problem moving forward, allowing the plants to slowly regrow. This could be avoided by using a fishless and a plantless cycle, where you add your substrate, hardscape and your filter, and then dose the tank with an ammonia solution and let the tank cycle with the light turned off to stop algae development, and then you add your plants, algae eaters and fish. Speaking of fish, I also added my White Cloud Mountain Minnows to the tank at the end of week 4. I purchased these from Horizon Aquatics, a local supplier that I trust as I've never had any issues with the fish, so I don't quarantine them. Being around an hour away from my home, the fish were a little stressed from the journey and they mostly look white in the video footage, but they did quickly regain their golden colour. I wanted 6 fish to get a mix of males and females, but I ended up getting 8 because I didn't want the last 2 left in the tank by themselves. Thankfully it didn't take long for the minnows to acclimate to the tank, and within an hour they were out and about exploring their new home. So fast forward to today and the tank looks great in my opinion. All of the algae has been eliminated and it only took the algae eaters 10 days to deal with it all. I did unfortunately lose 2 Anubias plants during the cycle and process, but I have tweaked my method to prevent this from happening in the future. I was a little worried about the rocks negatively impacting water parameters, but both the pH and TDS levels remain stable and I haven't lost any of the fish or shrimp or snails to my knowledge. I did decide to remove the Limnophila Sessiliflora and replace it with dwarf Sagittaria because the Limnophila just kept overtaking the tank and needed multiple trimmings per week, and I was wanting to try dwarf Sag in one of my tanks. I've also added duckweed and water lettuce to help maintain safe and stable water parameters, as it's a lot easier to scoop this out with a comb once a week than trim the Limnophila. Although the White Cloud Mountain Minnows began to breed as soon as I added them to the tank, the snails do eat the eggs, so I wasn't expecting fry, but there are at least 3 fry in the tank that I've seen at the same time now, but there could be more in there. I have started to add some Hikari First Bites fry food to where they like to hide in the back right of the tank to try and increase their survival rates, but so far the fries seem to be doing really well. Initially the white clouds preferred breeding in the foreground of the tank, but since I switched the Limnophila for the dwarf Sag, they do seem to prefer that area in the back left of the aquarium. Now I am new to White Cloud Mountain Minnows, but there does seem to be a cycle where they prefer to breed every morning and then they'll go about their business as the day progresses, and then the cycle repeats every single day. I'm pretty sure I saw 1 female Neocaridina shrimp carrying eggs a few days ago, but I haven't seen any baby shrimp in here yet, but it does take time for the babies to develop, so time will tell. The Armano shrimp seem to have worked out. If they stay near the narrow leaf Java fern where the white cloud fry hide, they can easily steal the food for the fry and it's an easy meal, so they tend to stay over there. I've noticed a few clutches of snail eggs, and I did recently see some baby ram's horn snails, so they are starting to breed, but they can be prolific breeders. The Helanthium Tenellum Green is starting to spread through its stolons, showing how quickly this can carpet, and keep in mind this is a room temperature tank, so it's not heated, and this plant is still grown even though it's December at the time of recording. This tank was surprisingly easy to set up and it really does require minimal maintenance. I removed some duckweed once per week and I had a small amount of water to compensate for evaporation. Beyond that, everything runs pretty smoothly and there's been no problems with ammonia spikes, TDS increases or anything like that, so there's not been a need for regular water changes. If you are a beginner, I highly recommend this setup, and I've used this tank and its build process as a template for a blog post that I link in the description that goes into more detail and also links to all of the sources on why I do specific things. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching and have a good day.